The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Planted with Sara Payan podcast. I am Sara Payan, your host, and today, a dear friend of mine on the show. He does so much. He is a musician. He is an author of many, many books on the Grateful Dead. He's actually a world-renowned expert on the Grateful Dead. He is also the host of the Sirius radio show Tales from the Golden Road. My dear friend, David Gans. David, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today.
It's nice to be part of it. I've been following you for quite a while here.
Same. So I'm going to ask you the question I always ask all of my guests first. What was your first cannabis experience?
I was just thinking about that as I prepare for this. I was a teenager in Foster City, California I would guess it was in early 1967. I have an older brother, 2 years older, and he was a good deal more adventurous and fearless than I was. And I one evening we went over to another guy's house out there in Foster City, which was a brand new suburb dug up out of the bay on an island off of San Mateo. And we smoked some weed at this guy Larry's house, and then we walked back to our apartment, half a mile away or so. And I remember feeling pretty goofy. And I think I scared my brother. We were walking across this low bridge that had these lights along the roadway. And I said, "Oh, look, it says tear across dotted line." So I ran across the bridge. And I think my brother thought I was going to like jump in the water or something like that. So that's my main memory of getting high the first time, and I don't really remember how it felt. I just remember that I gave my brother so I must have been disinhibited enough to do that.
Yeah.
But that I don't remember much.
It's funny because it's like people either say that, they acted different and they know that must be because they're high, or they say, I didn't get high at all. I didn't get high at all. At least I don't think I did. And we asked the guy for our money back, and he's like, "Sure, give me what you've got left and I'll make it happen." And then didn't happen. Being like a kid and getting it from a senior in high school, you weren't actually going to like press the point.
No, look, I'm talking about like 1967 here. So it was a different world than the one that you were 14 in. And it's a very different world from the one that 14-year-olds are in now. I think back to that time, and I was living in San Mateo and going to Burlingame High School, and I remember hitchhiking up and down 101 and living to tell. There was that time I bought a saccharin tablet for $5 that didn't turn out to be LSD at all. But how many drug purchases did I make as a naive teenager that didn't, wind up with brain damage or death or something? So it was a safer time in a certain way, or maybe just a less wise time, but I got away with it.
Yeah, it definitely a safer time than now. I can't believe, for me, it was in the 80s. And so it was not as safe, but definitely safer than now. We weren't talking about phentermine and things like that. Like kids these days, they can't be as, I don't know, how would you say it, like carefree and curious maybe as we were able to be.
Well, I was never interested in the other drugs. Turns out I was in favor of psychedelics all along, and I never cared for downers. And I had my dalliance with uppers over the years, as people tended to do in the 80s. But really what I was mostly after was the spiritual and creative enhancement that psychedelics give you. And I never would, I didn't want to take reds and get out of my head. I wanted to get deeper into my head.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to have access to good quality materials.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think that lent to creativity for you and just all of the things that you've done with your career?
I was always a creative person. I was writing short stories and drawing pictures and stuff when I was little. And when I was a teenager, I was going through all of the emotional upheaval that hormonal kids go through. and I was writing a lot of poetry and stuff. And so smoking weed, it was a social thing. And, I identified with and hung out with the potheads in my high schools. But I just was never interested in getting out of my head and partying. I wanted to go sit down and write something or, pick up my guitar and improvise or something. So I was always a creative person. And so I just found it a lovely lubricant for that and never really an escape valve for anything.
Yeah, same, same. Even now, like when I go to events, and especially like when it's like an industry event, the joints will be passed around, and I take a puff or two, but I know where I am with my comfort because I like to relax and I like to be social, but I don't want to be out of my head. I always joke, if I have any more, I'll just stare at you and not be any fun, you
Well,
know.
cannabis doesn't promote focus and concentration like always, you'd sit there and realize you've been reading the same paragraph on that book 5 times and you still haven't registered. So it's not good for linear. Like I always thought cannabis was good for getting stuff out of my head onto the page, but then you want to be sort of sober when you have to edit it and put it together and make it sharper and make it make sense, right?
Yeah.
So I've always found it to be an enhancement for creativity, but I don't like to be high all the time because I need to do all this critical thinking that it doesn't promote.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I totally feel that. I know, like, I was just talking to Mara Gordon, and she was saying, well, do you use THC at all during the day? And I'm like, maybe very small amounts with like non-euphoric
Mm.
cannabinoids because I really like CBG and CBD to help with like focus. But to have too much THC during the day, I find for my body is distracting.
Yeah, same here. And I've never been one of those be high all day people. I've never been a wake and baker, because I feel like really pot is good for those unstructured creative things like, playing music and having sex.
Yeah.
It's good for those things. It's not good for writing an outline for your presentation and things like that.
That,
Although I have to say, the last big book project, my collaboration with Blair Jackson on "This Is All a Dream We Dreamed: An Oral History of the Grateful Dead," it fell to me toward the end of our process to write the first draft of our introduction to the book. After spending a year developing the text, it was like, okay, now we got to write the intro. And I faced that daunting moment of, okay, what's the first word I'm going to put down? And I chose that evening. I chose to get really, really stoned, and smoke a lot of weed and just blast whatever I could out of my head onto the page. And then, because I'm working with Blair, it was great to have a partner. It wasn't all on me. So I blasted all this stuff out onto the page and gave it a cursory rewrite. And then I gave it to him the next day, and we passed it back and forth. That was our process for doing the book. And it turned out to be pretty good stuff. And I don't recall that it needed a huge amount of restructuring or anything. So in that particular case, the get high and open the valve approach worked well.
yeah. I mean, I think for a tool with brainstorming, it can be super helpful. But then, like you said, you got to go back and finesse it a little afterwards but it is like I find that when I'm high, I do like to have a paper and a pen next to me so that because sometimes there'll be thoughts that'll come up and then later on I'll look at them and I'll be like, wow, I really like that. And then sometimes it's like, wow, I was high. What was I thinking?
Yeah. I don't feel like I don't usually I too, have carried a notebook around in my pocket for decades because you never know when you're going to get an idea.
Yeah.
But I don't recall that many times where the thing that I wrote down was like just embarrassingly weak the next day. Usually, if I bother writing it down, it's got some merit.
Yeah. Well, I just am always amazed at like it's 50-50 for me. it's 50-50, but it gives me a good chuckle when it doesn't make sense. I'm like, wow, okay. All right. Well, you got it out there, didn't you?
But I also, one of my rules for myself as a songwriter and sometimes as a prose writer as well is to trust my subconscious or my instincts. And sometimes I'll put a phrase down on the page and go, ah, hmm. But over the years, have grown to trust that and go, I'm going to leave that in. And it
Yeah.
usually turns out to be something that it's okay. It's like those phrases, that it might not necessarily make sense on your first reading of it, but it turns out to be the right thing to say in that moment because your subconscious is smarter than your filter.
Yeah. Do you ever kind of tuck things away and save it for later and come across it in just the time that you need it? You're like, oh, look at that.
Occasionally, I've had song ideas or little melodic hooks and stuff that have been with me for decades, and every once in a while, one of those will like finally find a place, and arrive and place itself in a song that I've been working on, and that's really gratifying. It's like, oh, okay, well, that song took 25 years to finish, but it was worth waiting on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a process. It's like things things aren't fully cooked till they're ready.
Yeah. But I also work in improvisational music where it's not about composing and refining. It's about keeping the vessel clean so that you can deliver a good present performance. And that's another place where I've never weed doesn't I don't use weed to lose control. I use weed to enhance my relationship with the music. I've often said that smoking weed makes me horny to play. And it's not that I don't play well if I'm not high, but when I'm especially in an improvisational situation, it just sort of I feel like it sort of displaces the inputs and outputs and scrambles things just a little bit on your inner switchboard. Not enough to fuck you up, but enough to give you new perspectives, slightly new ways to look at things. And I find that that's a useful, it's almost like that sort of synesthesia thing. It doesn't make you, see sound or hear flavors or anything, but it's kind of akin to that, where it just kind of scrambles things a little bit so that new ideas present themselves and you can refine those into something useful.
I can
So I
see
like
that.
I never go on the air as a broadcaster high because my job primarily, especially on Tales, is to listen to people and follow what they're saying and have something useful to say in response to it. So a drug that would cause me to lose concentration wouldn't make sense there. Um, well, I will, just as an aside, on New Year's Eve of 1990, I was preparing to go on the air on a global hookup broadcasting the Grateful Dead's concert from the Oakland Coliseum with the great, great Ken Nordine on our air staff and Barry Scott from KPFA and Jack. Oh, suddenly I've forgotten the guy's name. So there were four of us on the air, and just before we were going live, Owsley Stanley came up and handed me a tab of acid. And I said, "Thank you, Bear," and saved it for later. He sort of thought I would take a nice big dose of acid to go on, at the beginning of like an 8 hour live broadcast. And I was, nope, thank you, no. I need to be that guy. I need to be the rational, available guy. Then I took that dose another day and got exactly what I was hoping for from it.
And then you got to enjoy it without having to worry about other people's experiences experiencing you being on air.
Want to be irresponsible. But I like being high whenever I'm playing. Playing music with other people, it's a nice state of mind to be in. It just kind of it's relaxed, and again, it just kind of opens all your inputs a little bit, I think, to um, puts you in a good mood.
Yeah. Do you think it's a lot of people talk about creativity in cannabis and getting into that flow state when you're doing like when you're having like a longer jam session with people and you're improvising and kind of weaving together, sound and what is your perspective on it? Do a lot of the people that you be playing with, will you kind of just kind of sit, have a smoke, and then start to play, or is every time the process a little different? Or this episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
It surprises me some how many of my hippie musician friends don't smoke weed. I consider this to be pothead music. God knows the people who invented it were potheads. Grateful Dead music is definitely pothead music, and it has been pothead music for me all these years. But even back in the 80s, the band, I started playing with some Cal guys in like 1974 when I first moved to the East Bay. And even some of those guys weren't potheads, and some of them, you might be surprised at some of the sort of most prominent Grateful Dead-ish musicians out there who don't smoke weed. And it's always one of those things when you go into a session with some new people, you go, do you smoke weed? Nah, not for this. It's a little bit surprising to me. And then, oh, okay, here's the one who does want to go outside and have a smoke with me before we go. But to me, it promotes it, and it does not impede my connection to the music or the other people at all. It doesn't impede my rational, because music, particularly this improvisational music, is sort of the highest expression of both rational and irrational things. Can be completely abstract and instinctual, or it can be really, really deliberate and scientific and thought out. And good musicians know what they're doing sort of musicologically without letting it set the agenda for what they're doing. So I totally understand the people that don't want to lose control even on that level, and they engage well in it. But to me, I prefer the enhancement of being, and it never ever impedes my ability to follow what's going on, or to connect with the people. And it's all about, to me, that making music the way we do is an incredibly intimate process, and it's sort of like group sex in a certain way without the bodily fluids sloshing around. But you're connecting really deeply with people, and you're trusting people.
Yeah.
And you're in this together, and you're doing this thing. In his autobiography, Phil Lesh referred to this mentality as serving as the fingers on a hand. They wanted to all be this same organism making this music by joining their minds, and that's a really great thing to aspire to.
Yeah, absolutely. For myself, as somebody who plays with jazz, it's especially when I'd be composing something new, I always found that having at least a little bit quieted the inner critic so that I could kind of push past that and tell myself I'm throwing everything out there, but it doesn't mean it has to stay later. Like I can play with it and do things. Whereas sometimes if I don't do that, I'll hold myself back because I have this very critical side that's like, does that sound right? Oh, that's weird. Oh, but it's like sometimes the weirdest stuff actually sounds the best. It's like, oh, I broke past like my rational mind that is not really serving me in this moment, and I'm getting some really interesting stuff out there to play with.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I haven't been intimidated by my inner critic in decades. Particularly in the last few years, when the pandemic started, I started playing a live show every day from home, and I'm still doing that every day pretty much. And it's been the best thing that ever happened to my playing, my chops, and my singing and stuff. And so I feel wherever I go, it's like, well, I was invited to be here. I'm being paid to be here. I'm a guest here, whatever. There's never any sense of, oh, you're not good enough to do this. I mean, I feel like, clearly by definition, I was invited to be here, so I must be good enough to do it. And so I just never have that sense of, oh, I just blew it. Plus, this music isn't about perfection. That's one of the most important things the Grateful Dead taught us was that they're giving a real-time performance of this song, and it's going to be different every time because nobody's playing the exact same notes every single time they do this. They're playing it how the way they feel it today and the way they operate in intimate concert with the other people on the stage, and that means surrendering to what the other guy's doing. One of the bands I'm in right now is the other guitar player in the band, Joe Rudd, plays like he really digs into the lead guitar stuff and plays long solos and all. And I I'm really enjoying being the second guitarist in that band, right? He tends to be the first guy to do the like execute the furniture of the song, to play the lick that defines the song and stuff, which frees me up to play the less prominent part. So it's like just this wildly open creative opportunity for me to not be responsible for the main structural elements of the song. And I trust him completely to be the front guy, the lead guy, and to drive that jam. And I just completely relish the opportunity to be the support guy in that circumstance. Because I play alone all the time and I'm solely responsible for every damn note that comes through the microphone. So it's really great to be also like yesterday I played with Dave Jess on bass and Anna Elva on drums, and it's like a wonderful rhythm section. And when you trust all the people you're playing with, you can just relax, and fasten your seatbelt and just enjoy. And all of that is I'm sure because I've spent this lifetime now, 60 years of smoking weed and playing music as if it were the most natural thing.
You think that, I mean, I get into these conversations about music and perfectionism. Perfectionism is kind of boring.
Yeah.
I mean, when you get like into the music that people really get into, like the Grateful Dead or the Rolling Stones, there is no perfection. It's people enjoying what they're doing, just digging into the music.
And yet there's an entire culture built around the other thing that they're utterly set in stone, like the Eagles approach. In 1981, I saw the Eagles on the Long Run tour, and I was blown away by how perfectly they executed every single song, exactly as it was on the record, lick for lick. And I was so amazed by it. I went back the next night and saw them do the exact same show the exact same way. And I thought, well, that is so inverse of what I came for, what music making is to me. You grow up on the Grateful Dead, you grow up on, you know, accepting certain moments of sloppiness because it can never be perfect and it should never be perfect. It can be perfect. I name my record company Perfectible Recordings because I feel like perfection is attainable and I've experienced perfection on occasion, but it's not required. It's not what we're here for. We're here to have this real time experience. And that's way more interesting to me than the thing of going up there and doing it exactly the same every time.
Yeah.
That's it's a valid way of performing, and obviously it's a hugely popular one. You don't only the Grateful Dead would go play a stadium in front of 75,000 people without knowing exactly what was going to happen. You go to a Billy Joel concert, the lighting cues, the sound cues, everything is timed out on a computer to the subframe and stuff. So everybody knows what's going to happen at any given moment. And a lot of times they know where Bruce Springsteen's going to plant his right foot at the end of that skid across the stage because it's all so well worked out, right? And it's the other is like the bar band ethos. The Grateful Dead took the bar band ethos all the way up to stadiums and would play abstract, unplanned music for extended stretches in front of an audience that expected it, trusted it, and adored it.
Don't you think that kind of creates more of a relationship and intimacy between the audience and the band?
Well, I cannot imagine anybody surrendering, giving up their life to go buy a book of tickets and go to every Eagles tour, Eagles
Right.
show on a 2-month tour. But you would go see 15 Grateful Dead shows in the summer because every one of them was going to be different in the place in which it happened, the people with whom you did it, the drugs you took for that day, the weather that day, what whether you ate too much at breakfast. All of these factors um, pointed to an utterly unique experience each time you did it. And then you go back the next day and the songs are different, the weather's different, your food is different, the people you're standing next to are different, the drug you took is different this time. So we signed up for this endlessly varied experience in life and in that music. And I consider myself a direct descendant of the Grateful Dead in that I've adopted exactly those values. I play original music, I play interpreted music, I link it all together with improvisation, and I play in collaboration with other musicians who share these values. And I have the advantage of having access to great players to have these ecstatic experiences with because we share these values.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do well in a band where I was required to play the Chuck Berry part on this song and the I can't. I've never been that guy. I've never had to play bar mitzvahs when I was a kid, so I learned the songs that I wanted to learn and played in bars and stuff, but I've never had that thing of having to completely subsume my own musical identity into somebody else's for a gig. It doesn't interest me to do that.
Yeah, but you mentioning that, I'm wondering how many Grateful Dead themed bar mitzvahs there have been. I'm sure there have been. I'm sure there
There
have
are
been a
different
few.
approaches to playing Grateful Dead music too, and I play this music. I haven't done it so much in recent years, but I'd walk into a town and step on stage with a bunch of people I'd never met before, and we would make because we speak this language together. We could make meaningful music come off of that stage. But every once in a while, you'd run into a band that was, I consider sort of the dogmatic end of the scale, where the bass player, all the Phil songs were sung by the bass player and the keyboard player sang the Brent songs. It was not the socialist thing of from each according to his ability. It was assigning each person a role in a pageant. Whereas in any band I was ever in, it wasn't like you're going to sing the Jerry songs, I'm going to sing the Bob songs. One of the guys was more or less the rhythm player, and there were two more or less lead players in the band. But, we sang the songs that we wanted to sing. A guy brought the song in, but it wasn't like, Phil, the bass player does the Phil songs. That's, I think, the least interesting way to do this music. But that's my problem again because that music is so phenomenally powerful. I mean, look at Dark Star Orchestra just played a huge show at the Greek Theater, playing the exact same set list that the Grateful Dead played on that same stage exactly 40 years earlier, and they were recreating that show. And they're amazingly wonderful players, and they're all really, really good at it. And they were not playing it note for note. They were recreating the energy, the vibe. They were playing that set list as a way of celebrating that moment, but they were performing in real time as real musicians making that real music. But the part of their marketing is that they're an accurate and faithful sonic and spiritual recreation of that music. Whereas the kind of bands that I've been have always been just super ramshackle. Let's just get together and play. And, it's not, who wants to sing Bertha today?
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, well, you're the Jerry, so you do the Bertha. I mean, but it's such amazing music, and it can be approached in so many different ways and each one of these is a valid approach.
But you do have in common with them the fact that it's more of a flow state homage rather than rigidity around the music.
Yeah, yeah. But even the restricting of the vocal parts to the appropriate musician, I think, is a sort of a weirdly limiting thing. But if that's their approach, that they're, the sort of the more faithful end of the things, I can't really quibble with it. Anybody that can get an audience to play the music that they love playing that's, there's no point in criticizing that or attacking that. If you can get paid to play the music that you love, or even if you don't get paid for it, if you can find an audience to listen to you playing the music that you love, go get them, kid. That's what
Yeah.
we're here for.
Yeah. So speaking of concerts and the Dead, you just went to go see the show at the Sphere. What was your impression? What was that like? 'Cause I've been meaning to talk to you about this. I saw your pictures.
I love the Sphere. I'm fortunate that my job in that world doesn't require me to have opinions.
Yeah.
I don't need to render my judgment as to whether it's a cash grab or whatever. I mean, there's so many armchair quarterbacks in the Grateful Dead world that are sitting back going, well, John Mayer, blah blah blah. I This music is immortal. This music is going to outlive the people who invented it. It is in the process of outliving the people who invented it. And however they choose to approach it is fine with me. I've watched Bob Weir go from being the teenage kid brother of a bunch of punks to being a true leader and a true giant in this musical, cosmos that he's the patriarch of this thing now, and he grew into that role brilliantly over the years. So I'm just thrilled with what they're doing. And the presentation at the Sphere was really, really fun. I mean, the graphics you're sitting in the middle of this giant, thing with 270-degree visuals around you and going way up over your head. And the band is this sort of little tiny little squad sitting on a platform at the bottom of all this. So you're watching all this stuff happen. The music, the audio is spectacularly clear and good. And it's like the wall of sound level of clarity with an entirely different technology delivering it. And the band, because of the restrictions of the mode of presentation there, they're using a simplified setup, I think, on stage. And they're just, I was there the opening weekend, and I heard all three shows, and I thought they just played magnificently. They picked right up where they left off because these guys are that thing. They are the human gestalt that is Dead and Company has been doing this for 8 years, and they're comfortable with each other, and they slip right back into it. And it was musically quite wonderful, and the presentation, the visual presentation, I'm looking forward to going back at the end of the run to see how has evolved because they brought in new pieces. I'm sure they've been evolving and re-rendering some of the older pieces, and there's a lot of stuff that I think has live interactive qualities to it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the visuals go again. And just the being there in that place with all those people
Mhm.
is also a wonderful thing. The Sphere staff at the Sphere are lovely. It's a $20 margarita and all that bullshit, but that's the nature of the business these days. And
Right.
the seeing the Grateful Dead for $2.50 was great in its day, but that's not available to us now. So this other thing, it is what it is, and I'm sorry that it isn't available to everybody on every economic stratum, but that's above my pay grade to decide. And I thoroughly enjoyed the music and being part of it, and I enjoyed being in that thing with 15,000 of your closest friends. It's
Yeah.
it's there's nothing like it. And leaving the building after the show every evening, there's these long ramps that come down from the upper levels onto the main concourse, and then everybody filters down another staircase and out. And you'd hear like hundreds of people as they're trooping down the stairs just let out this collective whoop together. Just everything just had this joyous feel to it. And at the end of the night, also, there were like a line of like 30 of these young employees, many of whom had been wandering around all evening holding up a paddle that said, "How can I help you?" It's the hospitality thing at Sphere is very cool. But they all lined up at the end just to wave and say thank you as we walked out. It was so sweet. And so everything about it is a delight. And getting to broadcast from there for Sirius XM was really, really fun. And we just found out we get to go back and do that again on the closing weekend. So Gary
So
Lambert and I will be doing a 2 hour pre-show on the Friday and Saturday of that closing run. And then we get to do Tales from Vegas too before we go home. So I'm looking forward
that
to seeing it
wow.
again. I just did the Oteil and Mike Comes a Time podcast talking with them and just schmoozing with Oteil about his experience of of playing it. And also just his experience of acquiring this music, it's funny, we were talking about uh, how what he was told when he first joined this band, and it was sort of odd. He said, "Well, yeah, nobody told me I should listen to 10 shows. They just, here they listen to this one show." And it took him a while to figure out that it wasn't learning the licks of that one song that one time. It's learning the language of this music so you can play each song in its place, in its moment, each way. So it was fun to compare notes with him about the process of acquiring this music, you know. But and it's just lovely to watch him play it. He's such a sweet guy and such an amazing musician in a very different way from Phil Lesh. And he serves the music in his own way, which I find just completely delightful.
That's cool. That's cool. I've heard really wonderful things about Oteil, and I've met Bob, and he's a lovely, lovely human being. It was very special to be able to get to spend just even a little bit of time with him. And I was, just thinking about the Sphere, and I was thinking about when I heard it was happening, and I thought about those pictures of Bob as a young man and what he would have thought of then if somebody told him how many decades down the road you're going to be in this crazy ass Sphere in Vegas with like all these amazing visuals, and it was going to be just filled to the hilt of people that have followed him for years and are just, taking in this experience. And I wonder what that young man would have thought.
Are you looking for a lasting, meaningful way to connect with your audience and highlight your brand? Well, listen up, because Planted with Sara Payan is taking on new sponsors. Here's a powerful stat. 20% of listeners are more likely to support brands they hear about on a trusted podcast. And 60% actually look up that product after hearing about it. That's the power of podcasting. Planted with Sara Payan has a unique draw. With remarkable guests, we attract and engage audience that spans all sides of the cannabis spectrum. Picture your message reaching these listeners time and again. Podcast ads are evergreen, meaning your brand stays relevant as new audiences discover and binge past episodes. It's a long-term investment that keeps on giving. If you're looking for a targeted, passionate audience with lasting impact, the right listeners are here waiting to meet your brand. Visit plantedwithsara.com to get a copy of our sponsorship deck today.
That's a really interesting thought experiment to think about what those guys were. And I've just recently I had intimate contact with that question. I've been helping Amelia Davis with a book of Jim Marshall's Grateful Dead photos. Amelia was the heir to Jim Marshall's estate, and she's done many wonderful books from his archive, and she hired me to do the text for Jim Marshall's Grateful Dead. And revisiting all of those Haight-Ashbury moments, they had a concert on Haight Street, the Monterey Pop Festival, and all these places the Grateful Dead played when they were a tribe of very, very young musicians, barnstorming the country and hoping to change the world. What their ambitions were, what their hopes were, what their projections were of their own future, I'm sure probably didn't include, a billion-dollar entertainment center in Las Vegas, Nevada. But I also feel that, again, I mentioned this earlier, that Bob Weir has made himself into a historic figure, really, and really the patriarch of this culture. And I'm really thrilled. They just announced yesterday the Wolf Bros are doing a series
I
in the
saw
fall
that.
with symphony orchestras, and I saw that at Stanford the last time they did it, and I loved it, that whole thing. So I'm thrilled that he is at the top of his game at this point and doing such amazing stuff with such great success. Everybody who ever picked up an instrument wanted to have an audience. And some of them wanted to do it and would do anything they could as long as they could make money doing it. And some of us had the good fortune of being able to do what we wanted and earning a decent living from it. And I think Bob is a just I've known him, not well. I used to hang out with him a lot in the 80s before he settled down and had a family and stuff. When we were both bachelors, I hung out with him more in those days. but it's always been my experience. He just seems like a kid from a wealthy suburb whose parents raised him right. And I think he emerged from all that stuff as a thoroughly decent guy without a greedy bone in his body. And a guy who went through some ups and downs, but marshaled his personal resources brilliantly and pulled himself through all that shit and made himself into this truly formidable artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally see that. The first the first time I met him, I was in a green room, and I just remember, and Jeff laughed because, as you know, I appreciate the Grateful Dead very much, but I was not as immersed in all of that as like you or my husband, and I saw him in
Neither was your husband when he started that gig. But
I know.
watching Jeff become one of us has been a real treat over these years.
I know, because you knew him for years before that even. That's right. That's right. But I just remember seeing Bob in the corner of the room and not even, at the moment, it didn't even register that it was Bob, because he was just sitting there taking in everything. Because I'm that way. I'm social, but I'm also an introvert. And when I'm in a room, I like to just kind of see what's going on and take in the buzz. And I saw somebody on the other side of the room, and we both made eye contact. We just politely nodded to one another, went back to our people watching. And then it was after that Jeff was like, Bob, I'd like you to meet my fiance Sarah, because it was before we were married. And he came up, and he was just delightful. But at that moment, before I realized it was Bob, I was just like, oh, just a fellow kindred spirit, taking it all in, just very, just solemnly, quietly, just checking everything out. And I thought, wow, because he could be so different with everything that he's done.
He's an interesting personality, and yeah, I think he was a quiet guy in a lot of ways. I think I was younger, and but he was also, that when Owsley met those people, he told me, I did an interview with Owsley in 1991 that's in my book Conversations with the Dead, and when he met the Grateful Dead, he said it was the smartest group of people he'd ever encountered in one place, that they were just carrying on all these conversations at a really, really high level. And that's a great contrast to the stereotype image, of the Grateful Dead as being a bunch of perpetually stoned hippies and shit. And I really feel like the lamest stereotype of the Deadhead sort of got visited upon everybody in that world. And anybody that ever mistook Jerry Garcia for, some brain dead hippie just never fucking met the guy.
Yeah.
All of these people were incredibly smart, incredibly well read. Bobby didn't read so much because he's dyslexic, but they could carry on these conversations at a really high level with each other because they were engaged with the world, and there's this song, the last song that Jerry and Hunter wrote together, called Days Between. A magnificent, magnificent piece of work. And I sing the song all the time because it's our story too. We were along for most of that as fans, as part of the story. But there's this line in there: there were days, I know, when all we ever wanted was to learn and love and grow. Once we grew into our shoes and told them where to go. And that really was what they were doing. They were deeply committed. Read Rosie McGee's book, Dancing with the Dead. She was she was Phil's partner in all that time when they were all living together in one big house and practicing 8 hours a day and all this other stuff. They were profoundly committed to this human gestalt that they were building. And they rehearsed endlessly to perfect the certain adventurous aspects of their music, like playing in 11/4 time and things like that. So none of them were casual about this. I think they all made a lifelong commitment to it and stuck together through a lot of weird shit over the years. Because, as we always know in all these cases, being together is better than not being together.
Absolutely. Last year I had Mountain Girl on the show, and we had
The greatest.
She's wonderful. And like the conversations that we had, and just really, like, a lot of people don't understand like that, before when they were the Warlocks, like the Electric Kool-Aid experiments and just the group of intellectuals that they came out of, like these people everybody was doing really interesting stuff and having some really real conversations that have impacted our culture more than I think a lot of people could even get their head around.
That's very true. And there's some interesting stuff from John Perry Barlow, who was spending time with the Eastern acid people at Millbrook and spending time with the pranksters out west, and noting the sort of contrasts between their approaches to these things. There's also a wonderful book that was written by Carol Brightman, the sister of the Grateful Dead's lighting director, Candace Brightman, for many years. Carol was a leftist, a deeply committed leftist political activist. She went to Cuba with the Vincent Ramos Brigade and things like that in the 60s. And she wrote this book called Sweet Chaos, The Grateful Dead's American Adventure. And it was asking the question, why did this hedonistic culture of joy thrive while all of these other arguably more important political movements didn't? And the answer is almost contained in the question, because the joyous movement is going to attract more people than the grim, teeth clenched political activism and stuff. But the Grateful Dead tapped into something. I don't know the exact source of the quote, but it's certainly covered in several of the books, that Jerry would always say, well, let's see what happens if you live your life according to principles of joy. They were emerging from this drab, conformist 1950s and going to aerospace engineering school mentality. And they were looking to break free of it. And Jack Kerouac and the Beatles and Bob Dylan kicked the doors open for these people to become musicians, to become people whose lives are an act of performance rather than an act of compliance, and to make their own joyous noise. Phil Lesh said, when I went to see Hard Day's Night, I said I found myself the only guy in a room full of screaming chicks and immediately started growing my hair out. And everybody decided they wanted to be a rock star, because what could be more fun than being in a band? Look what happened in that movie, A Hard Day's Night. I mean, what could be more fun than that? But they were serious about it. They didn't say we're going to become rock stars. They became serious musicians, and they created a musical language and inhabited it with this incredible vocabulary of original music and of interpreted music from other sources, and began a conversation that we all had the great privilege of sitting in on. And it was that thing. A bunch of really smart people. They were musically, non-verbally smart as they were literate and verbally smart, They were doing something incredibly sophisticated that required some energy and participation from the listener. And I think that's another one of the keys to it. It was participatory music. It didn't tell you everything it knows the first time you hear it. These songs could grow on you. You could hear this song for 20 years and then hear something new in it.
Mm-hmm.
You could hear you could hear the passage from China Cat Sunflower into I Know You Writer, and it would be different every time, even though they would usually go through this 4-chord thing. But how they got there in and out of it, and how they went from one to the other, and the solo that Bobby played coming out of China Cat Sunflower. And again, the mood that the singer was in when they got to the head of the song, and did they want to belt it out, or were they going to give it a slightly understated, there were variables at every turn, and the job is to be open to all of it, both for the listener and the purveyor of it. That we all, Brent Midland told me, you can't really, Bobby Weir told him when he joined the band, you can't really rehearse to be in the Grateful Dead, because it's about improvising. It's, you can rehearse the songs, you can learn the changes of the songs, and you can work out how to do all those things. But the thing of doing it, the improvisation, the playing of it, can't be practiced. You just do it. And the point of doing it is to be so well prepared that you can handle anything that comes your way, and to be a good enough listener and a generous enough partner to succumb to surrender to the collective will. One of my bumper sticker aphorisms about this is that this music works because everybody has the authority and power to dominate the rap and the good grace not to.
It turns it into a living organism.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
when you look at that, like, one of the things that I've learned is that the music itself and the culture, it's not about what you believe politically. I mean, there's deadheads come from all walks of life, all political persuasions. I was actually really shocked to see, like, some of the people who are deadheads that I never ever would have even expected. Like, it's crazy. It brings a lot of people together, and if we could do more of that in the world, think about, like, how many more heartfelt conversations we could have with people instead of it being as polarized as we are, especially in this country today.
Well, that's the nice thing about going to a Grateful Dead concert. You could be standing next to a United States senator on one side and a smack dealer on the other side, and you're all basically, the same person in that moment. You are all on an equal footing, sharing this joy. That's the thing about, Bill Walton out in the crowd. You didn't want to
Bill.
stand behind Bill, but standing next to Bill was a joyous experience because he was just like us. And that. Yeah, I wish there were more such things. But there's Dead tribute bands all over the country, and the Grateful Dead nights at a club in Gainesville, Florida, or in, Independence, Missouri. You can walk into that room. Or in January of this year, my friends Blair and Regan and I and a couple other older Deadheads addressed a class out at St. Mary's College. They had these between terms things called Jan term classes, and a woman teaches a Grateful Dead class during Jan term, and we're friends with her over the years. So she invites us out to have this little panel discussion and talk about Grateful Dead music for her students. This year it was all freshman students at St. Mary's College. And as it happened, the day that we went out there was also a day I was going to be performing at the Ashkenaz Dead Night. Here, there's a club here in Berkeley called the Ashkenaz. That's a nonprofit community center, and every Wednesday they have a Grateful Dead band. And as it happened, the night we did this, I was in the band. I was invited to play with Scott Guberman and some other musicians at the Ashkenaz. So I was there after sound check when the doors opened, and the students from the St. Mary's class came in. It was like their field trip was that they were going to come see a Dead cover band in the evening. And I was standing there watching as they were opening the doors, and these two young women who were already inside saying, "Oh, what's this?" as the kids started streaming in. I said, "Oh, that's a class from St. Mary's that I spoke to this afternoon. They came to check out a Grateful Dead scene." And these two young women said, "Oh, let's go over and introduce ourselves and make them welcome." And they did. And then I spoke to the teacher, a day or two later, and she said that the kids loved the music, but they were just blown away by the welcoming nature of the crowd, that they were just brought in and embraced and introduced to it. And that I always also adduce, oddly enough, a line from John Denver that you wouldn't think would apply to a Grateful Dead thing, but there's a line in one of his songs that goes, "Coming home to a place he'd never been before." And that I've had that experience. I've heard people describe that experience. There's also a wonderful film by a woman named Lonnie Fraser called A Box of Rain that recounts her own experiences. She had a traumatic experience as a kid out in the Midwest. And as part of her healing process, a friend of hers said, "I'm going to go out and see the Grateful Dead in Colorado. I'll buy you a ticket if you'll come with me." And so she goes on this ride with her friend, to helping sorting out her life after this traumatic experience. And she describes going to that scene and arriving in that scene and how warm and welcoming it was and what a life changer it was. So I recommend that I put that in my syllabus for the class I'm teaching at Stanford in the fall because it's just a perfect first person account of how this culture, you can come for the music and that's great and discover the culture, but you can come for the culture and find out that the music's pretty damn cool too. And that the many different ways to appreciate and comprehend this thing is another part of what makes it so amazing. And yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could create even more opportunities for people to experience being completely welcome in a completely joy-based social situation that has to do with listening to music and dancing and smoking weed and shit.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. In many ways, like cannabis itself, like being in the cannabis community, the cannabis industry, there are people from all walks of life and all belief systems. And we all like, I think one of the things that brings people together, at least I know, depending on what you're interested in, it's like they don't get into politics as much as they do their interest in, whether it's growing beautiful flowers or like in my case, like I do policy, but I figure if somebody believes in creating greater access for the patient and creating better policy, I can work across the aisle with people. We appreciate each other's passions and heart around that. And the difference is, for the moment, we'll put those aside. We'll look at the work at hand. And I think that, it's cannabis can also be a great way of bringing people together and creating that soft space in our hearts to see each other as human beings rather than polarizing by our beliefs. That's not to say that it doesn't happen from time to time.
Well, it's pretty much a legendary fact of life here that we don't see very often, bars trashed by marijuana crazed crowds. The alcohol is a much greater facilitator of violence than cannabis, in my experience.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every time that I've had a gathering and I've rented a space, they're always really nervous. And afterwards, they're like, "You guys are great. Like, this place is intact. My bathroom looks beautiful. Everybody left by midnight." I'm like, "Yeah, we all go home early. There's snacks at home." But as we're wrapping up, what are some things that you're excited and hopeful about in the future, and what are you working on?
Well, I mentioned this Stanford thing. Um, my old friend and colleague Joel Selvin, formerly of the San Francisco Chronicle, called me last fall and said Stanford is looking for somebody to teach a Grateful Dead class to their continuing studies department. And he gave me a phone number, and I called this guy, and I showed him my CV, and he said, "Oh yeah, you'll do." So I in the winter quarter, I taught a class that they called Psychedelia and Groove, the music and culture of the Grateful Dead. And to everyone's surprise, it drew a really big turnout. They were expecting 50 or 60 students, and we had 330 students.
Oh, congratulations.
All done on Zoom. So I sat in the very chair I'm sitting in right now, conducting this class with all these people from coast to coast, and it was just huge fun. I brought colleagues and friends in. Not Dennis. Dennis is going to do the next one with him, but Gary Lambert, my co-host from Tales, Jesse Jarnow, who does the good old Grateful Dead cast, my friends and neighbors Blair Jackson and Regan McMahon, who published the Golden Road fanzine for all these years and stuff. So each class was more like a seminar than a lecture. I said, I'm not going to give tests. I'm not going to grade essays. I'm not going to give a detailed history. You can read the history. We're going to talk about how the music works. I'm a musician and an oral historian, and I have talked to these musicians about this music for 50 years. And I've been making this music for 50 years. So we're going to talk about how the music works. That's the niche that I occupy. I'm not a musicologist, and I'm not a historian. I'm a musician who plays this music. And it turned out hugely popular. The Stanford people were delighted and asked me if I wanted to do it again. The class stayed together and started a Facebook group for us, and many of them are planning to take the class again when we offer it in the fall. So actually, I should mention, if anybody sees this and is interested, along about the middle of August, this class will become available when they offer up the fall quarter classes. It's the place to look is continuingstudies.stanford.edu/Grateful Dead. The class is going to be given the title that I wanted it to have in the first place. They're calling it "Did It Matter? Does It Now? The Music and Culture of the Grateful Dead." That's a line from St. Stephen, you know. But so I'm really excited about that, and I've learned so much in doing it. And Gary Lambert and I have done these separate listening sessions where a lot of the students will come on a Zoom with me and we'll play music and talk about how the music works, what's going on in here and stuff like that. So I had been encouraged by some academic friends over the years to try to put together some kind of package that I could take to campuses, but I had never really figured out how to do that. So this opportunity just fell in my lap, and it turned out to be a very successful class. And I hope the second version of the class does well too, because I'd love to do this like twice a year going forward. It's super fun. This method of doing it suits me, and it seems to suit Stanford. And the response from the class has just been great. People love it.
Oh, I can't think of a better person to do it. I mean, all of the information that you have in your head has to be shared.
I'm very fortunate to have had this opportunity because there's no other subject matter I could do it with. And there's really not another format I could do it. If I had to like develop a curriculum and deliver a series of 6 lectures or something, I don't think I would have I would probably do it, but this was the way to do it, conversationally, improvisationally, and anecdotally, rather than, laying down a structure and all in the history. So it's great. I am in the process of getting ready to write a proposal to do another volume of Conversations with the Dead, collection of interviews, because I've been interviewing these guys for 50 years, and I published the first edition of Conversations with the Dead in 1991, but I've been interviewing people ever since. So there's at least one more volume of Conversations with the Dead that I want to do. I'm currently marketing this book. This is a collection of my photos of the Grateful Dead over the years, improvised lives, and my stories to go with them. Whoops. All my other books about the dead have been oral histories where the subjects do their own talking for the most part, the interview book and oral histories. This is the first time I've written any extensive texts about my own experiences in that world. So it's kind of my story of how I became a deadhead and how I became a deadhead journalist and how I became a collaborator with the dead, punctuated with all these photos that I took in those days because I was a photo journalist in my music journalism days and took a lot of pictures in those days as well. That's really it. The Tales from the Golden Road continues. I have the best partner in the world. Gary Lambert is just a wonderful guy, a thoroughly pleasant guy to be with, knows everything about the Grateful Dead and about jazz and about Broadway plays and about movies and TV. And so getting on the air with him every week, our main job is listening. It's called Tales from the Golden Road, and our mission is to listen to other people's stories. And we have information, we answer their questions, and we can correct, false rumors, whatever. But it's mostly about listening to other people tell stories and telling some stories of our own. And I often say I have the easiest job because Gary is so full of information. I usually am the second guy to talk. And so I consider it it's like I mentioned earlier, being the second guitarist in a band playing Grateful Dead stuff. It's like a really interesting job because the heavy lifting is being done by other people. Gary usually is the first guy with the information, so I could just sort of wait until I have something to contribute. So it's sort of it's just a nice spot to be in where I can speak when I have something to say, but there's somebody else willing to talk first. So it kind of lets me off the hook for holding the pace of the show, and I mean, kind of.
Yeah,
So
totally.
it's just great. I just consider myself just insanely lucky person to have the gigs that I have and the partners that I have. Gary's a wonderful guy to do all this with. And we also spent the last three Dead and Company tours doing interviews between sets on the nugs.net broadcasts. And I did that with him. We must have done 75 interviews in those 3 years. And we never once had to make notes or make a list of questions. We just did it
Well,
because
you know your stuff.
we know our stuff. But I also, again, he's like just the greatest partner to do these things with. And I also am fortunate to be married to the greatest human being I know. My wife, Rita Heralt, is creative and brilliant in her own right, and just a perfect life companion in so many ways. And so I count my blessings every day.
Yeah, I'm a huge Rita fan, and I met and I met Gary backstage at Dead and Company, and I really, really enjoyed talking with him. And the two of you are you just dovetail each other so well. It's wonderful listening to you both on the show.
I am a very, very lucky man, and I'm still playing live music every day. I've been touring more, although my age is catching up with me, and my desire to schlep around and rent a car has diminished over the years. But I'm still touring here and there. But mostly what I do these days is play a live show online every afternoon, usually at 4 o'clock. And you can find it on YouTube. I have my own channel on YouTube, and I also am on the D Gans music channel on Facebook. I just stopped doing it regularly on Twitter because they just required you to have a paid blue check account, and I did not pay Twitter for a blue check. Sorry.
Yeah, that's
I'm doing it live on
ridiculous.
YouTube and Facebook, but it's been great fun. It's just been wonderful musically. There's been a wonderful community that's developed around it, made a lot of new friends from playing every day. So again, I'm just an incredibly lucky guy to get to work from home with such wonderful collaborators.
And do you have any other contacts or social media you'd like people to know?
Well, I'm DGans53 on Instagram, but I don't really know how to use Instagram, so I'm not a particularly voluble user there. But that also shows me up on Threads. And I do post on Twitter and stuff, and I'll post the links to my performances after the fact, even though I can't stream them live anymore. And I'm available. I'm easy to find. If you're interested in writing to me about the Grateful Dead Hour or whatever, my email address is gans@well.com. That's the easiest way to find me, GANS@well.com. And I generally respond to queries from people. So. And my books and music are for sale at perfectible.net. And if you buy a book from me, like the ones behind me there, they're autographed by one or both of the authors because my co-author lives right down the street.
Oh, right on. Right on. Everybody, grab those books. They're amazing. There's so much information in there. I'd say that they also make actually very wonderful gifts for the deadhead in your life as well,
There
too.
you go. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. David, always a pleasure to sit down and talk with you, and I can't wait to see you in person soon since we don't live too far away from one another.
We should see each other more often.
We should.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be part of Planted.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you as part of Planted, and I look forward to having more conversations with you on the show in the future.
Cool. You know where to find me.
I do. Thank you, my friend. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Payan on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn. We are there. So join us, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.